Hi everybody, this is TheHande announcing that White Devil Podcast number 9 on video game movies is online right now. And you can go listen to it, where I'm going to put a bunch of links in here. Normally when a new podcast goes online, I've usually made a little teaser cut of the episode of the discussion, something that funny that happened on the podcast to hopefully get you to go and listen to it. However, this podcast was very, very focused, and it was very informative, and I enjoyed it a lot. But unfortunately, because we were so focused on the topics at hand, there's no way for me to just isolate a certain section of the podcast that would be kind of short and concise enough for a good teaser video. So instead, I'm here to tell you what the episode was like, what the guests were like, and hopefully this will get you to check out the video, and then, the podcast, and then at the end of this video, I'll have a bunch of links that you can take your pick from, what you want to, how you want to approach watching this podcast, or enjoying this podcast. And as you can tell, this is unscripted. Well, anyway, on the White Devil Podcast, we, of course, have the usual topics, the usual structure, of course, which is an introduction, then the actual conversation, and the Q&A. And in the midst of that, we also have the match game. And that was actually one of the interesting things. This was a very long podcast, where we had probably the most intense game of match game ever. So that's one thing to point out. And the conversation, we really, really covered a lot of ground about our favorite video game movies, our least favorite video game movies, and how we thought video game movies could get better. So that's interesting to think about. And also our guests. Well, first of all, we had Sendu, who of course has been on a lot of our podcast, a lot of the White Devil podcast, and he of course runs the website itstelltime.net. And you can actually find all of our guests' stuff on itstelltime.net. Sendu also has a YouTube channel called Light Studios, and he's also done Let's Plays with me, so you can check those out if you're interested to find out a little bit more about him. But basically, he has a lot of interest in video games, movies, television shows, and also Power Rangers. The other guest, of course, T-McBee, who's just a lovable goofball, and I've also done a Let's Play with her, and she's a lot of fun, and you can also find her stuff on itstelltime.net, but she also has an awesome blog called T-McBee's Review Center, which I highly recommend. She writes really good long-form blogs about mostly animation and films, so she's very much oriented in that. She also has interest in gaming, which is why we had her on as well. And yes, she's a lot of fun. And then we had Lindsay the Red make her second appearance on the podcast. She was featured on the second anime podcast, but unfortunately she could not be there for the whole podcast. We had a bit of a technical issue, and unfortunately she had to leave. We record the match game section before the actual conversation bit, so you can hear her during the match game sections, but unfortunately she wasn't there for the actual topical conversation. And this podcast, by the way, is over 3 hours, but a little over 2 hours of it is the actual topic that we're discussing. And I'll talk about a little bit more about that in a minute. Then making a long overdue return is Amuya, who is best perhaps known as the previous co-host of the Boo Chow podcast, a podcast that I used to be a regular guest on. And he's also an all-around, he loves video games, he loves movies, television shows. He's an all-around wonderful nerd, and that's why we had him on, because, he also added a lot to the podcast. And then we had Joe of Phoenix 8 Productions. He's also at It's Tell Time, and Joe is he used to frequently do movie reviews. He's been on a bit of a hiatus, but I knew that when I was going to do this topic on the podcast, that I had to have him on, because he knows a lot about movies. He's actually gone to film school, and he knows a lot more, and he has very strong opinions on things. So he definitely contributed a lot to the podcast. And like I said, all of their material is on itstelltime.net, so that's the one-stop shop if you want to check out all of their stuff. Okay, and really, it was very, very entertaining. And so, below in the description you will find some links, and the first link is a direct MP3 download of the podcast. If you just want to download it and then listen to it on your own time, you can do that. Now, like I said, it's a very long podcast. It's over 3 hours. So, after the direct link, I also have a link for the Internet Archives page for the podcast, and that contains a detailed timetable of everything that was discussed on the podcast. I do this for every single podcast because the podcasts are very long, and if there's one part that you're not particularly interested in, or if there's something that if there's only something specific that you want to hear in the podcast, then I think it's fair to let people choose what they want to hear. So if you don't necessarily want to listen to the match game part, you can skip over that and things like that. Then there's a link to my blog, but specifically it's a link to the dedicated page for the White Devil podcast, and that's where you will find previous episodes, you will find links to their Internet Archive pages, you will find links to their YouTube, to their teaser videos that I've made on YouTube, and also there's a Q&A there telling you a bit more detail about how the podcast is made. And I really hope that you go and see it. I hope you enjoy the podcast, and there's also a playlist of video game movie stuff on my channel, which actually has a collection of all the videos that I've done relating to video game movies. So if you want to prepare yourself a little bit ahead of time, I would recommend, there's 3 top 10s on that playlist that I would recommend you see. One of them is my top 10 video game movies list, the other one is my bottom 10 video game movies list, and then there's the 10 video game movies that were never made. And if you just want kind of a broad look on this topic, you can go check those out. Well, of course it's only my viewpoint, but it should give you a nice little preface for what to expect from the podcast. So, I hope you enjoyed the podcast. I'm TheHande Mäkinen, and see you on the next one.